The following program contains dialogue and subject matter that some members of our audience may find disturbing or triggering. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Hi there, my name is Adam Cooke. I'm the host of Telile 24/7, Roundtable, and Notre Côté here at Telile Community Television. I am also here as someone who has struggled for many years with general anxiety disorder. And I think it's time that we open the book on what anxiety disorders, mental health, depression, and similar situations really mean for the people of Richmond County and the surrounding areas. So what I've done today is assembled a panel of people that you may know from right here in your community, but you may not know their full stories when it comes to mental health and when it comes to what they're doing individually and together to try to raise awareness of mental health. So I'm very pleased to welcome Jennie Pardy, Taylor Linloff, and Tyler Shea to the Telile studios today. And I'd like to have each of them introduce themselves and explain why they are here and their own personal journey with mental health issues. I'll begin with Taylor Linloff.
Hello, my name is Taylor Linloff. I am from Port Hawkesbury in Inverness County. I am an LGBTQ and neurodiversity activist and advocate. I am also autistic and I live with bipolar disorder.
Thank you, Taylor. We'd now like to ask Tyler Shea to introduce himself. Tyler, if you will.
Hi folks, my name is Tyler Shea. I'm from Louisdale. I'm a behavior analyst and an early childhood interventionist, and I've lived with generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, treatment-resistant depression, OCD with intrusive thoughts, and suicidal ideations.
Thank you, Tyler. And rounding out our life experiences panel today is Jennie Pardy on my right. Jennie, if you will.
Thank you, Adam. My name is Jennie Pardy. I live here in Arichat, and I am a life coach and NLP practitioner. And some years ago, I suffered a few bad bouts of depression and generalized anxiety, and I'm recovered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennie. And right now, we are here to share our experiences and our thoughts with you. We can't stress enough that none of us are doctors. None of us are embedded in the medical field. We do recommend that if anything that you hear from us over the next little while sounds like something you're experiencing, you should seek some advice from a doctor, from a medical professional that you trust before making any other moves. We will be putting up crisis lines for anybody who is struggling with anxiety or depression in that sense, and you will see those along the bottom of the screen as we go. And as well, we want to point out that while what we're sharing with you are our own personal experiences, we are sharing them because we want to make sure that if somebody out there is going through anything similar, that they might realize that they're not alone. So for the next portion of our program, we're going to open up about our own experiences with mental health issues, with anxiety, with depression, and with similar conditions. And I would like to begin with Taylor, if I could, because Taylor has an interesting perspective as someone who has experienced anxiety and trauma, not just from their environment, but also from direct medical linkage. So Taylor, can you tell me a little bit about your first experiences and your most profound experiences with this?
Yeah, I've had traits of anxiety since childhood, most likely due to the trauma of bullying. I was an undiagnosed autistic child. I didn't get diagnosed with autism until I was 23, which was in around 2018. And when I was diagnosed, everything started to make a little more sense because when you're autistic, you often do not understand or recognize social cues, so I didn't understand that I was actually being bullied a lot of the time. So I actually had to process a lot of repressed trauma due to bullying that I didn't know it was bullying at the time. And even as a child, I was anxious because even though I didn't know I was being bullied a lot, I knew that I was different, which is a horrible experience to live as a child. Like, children should be able to be recognized and appreciated versus thinking that something is wrong with them.
So we'll ask the same question to you, Jennie. You alluded to issues that you had experienced just a few years ago, but what do you feel are some of your most striking and profound encounters with your own mental health issues?
Well, I guess the first time when I was 17, I remember the hospital room. It said the 17th of December. So that's when I was 17. That was probably 80-ish. And I had tried to commit suicide. I don't think my intention was to try and kill myself. I think it was just to try and calm down the thoughts that were running through my head, which was a constant thing. So then I took pills that helped me sleep. So I couldn't get sleep, so I just took some more. Didn't work, so I just took some more. And then instead of going to sleep, I started vomiting. So that was the first bad bout with depression, I think. And from then on, it was just a step process. It's not something that happened overnight. And that's how it all started.
Okay, thank you.
I'm happy you're still here.
Me too.
We're
Thank
very
you.
happy you're still here.
Thank you.
Tyler, Shea, you alluded in your introduction that you were actually in training to deal with issues like this, and then you had to take time away to be able to deal with them on your own. Can you tell me a little bit about what that process was like for you and when you realized that you were experiencing some trouble here?
Well, it's kind of interesting because it would have been around 2008, 2009 when I started working in like supported living homes. So I really started getting into that point, behavior analysis. And it was a few years after that that I got into early childhood intervention. But very early on, I learned about trauma-informed care. And so, I worked for 10 years or so applying all this knowledge and education that I developed around trauma-informed care, but I was doing that without ever viewing myself through a trauma-informed lens. And so I ended up in this field where, I ended up burning myself out. And when I look at it, it's like, something very common that a lot of people have. Like, we grow up, become empaths, because of something that we felt we lacked growing up. So like we want to help, we go into helping professions because of this, we want to help people. But we inevitably burn ourselves out because we don't give ourselves the empathy first, right? So that's so we project everything outwards, and that's sort of what happened to me around 2015. I had my first bout of major depression, and I went off work. And since then, like I've been back to work, off work, but it wasn't till 2 years ago that I really just stopped and said, okay, I have all this information on trauma-informed care that I'm always viewing other people with. I need to view myself with this lens, and I need to sort it out and like get to the root of things. And that's what I've been focused on the last 3 years, is just getting to the root of my own behaviors and really analyzing myself in ways that I would normally be analyzing other people, and realizing that connection that like I can't do that well enough. I don't have the emotional availability to do it for others, unless I put that effort into myself and figure that out first.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the point of loving yourself and showing empathy for yourself in a situation like this, because I do find that there's not the understanding that we quite need in this area in terms of treating mental health with the same importance as physical health. Because
Absolutely.
obviously, if you have cardiac arrest or you break your leg, you're expected to take time off to deal with this.
Yep.
But the concept of the mental health day actually started showing up as a joke. You know, it's not a matter of, oh, I don't want to go to work today, I'm going to blow off work and go watch a hockey game or go to the spa
real
or something
thing,
like
yep.
that. It's serious. And
It's
I
a real
personally
thing.
experienced that myself in my latest newspaper job before coming to work at Telile. I mean, I was going through that myself. So just want to throw this out to all of you. And Jennie, I'd like to start with you, if I could, the concept that mental health does have to be taken as seriously as physical health.
Yes, absolutely. It's a real thing. You go, like you said, Adam, you go to the doctor for a cut, you get stitched up, you get taken care of, you break a bone, you go, you get taken care of, you go home, you do the healing. But there's a big stigma attached to mental health, definitely. That needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Taylor, your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a chronic mental health condition that I'll have for the rest of my life. It's called bipolar disorder, and I am actually in what's called a grieving stage right now. I was only diagnosed with bipolar disorder back in February, so it's a relatively new diagnosis. So I'm starting to have to learn to adapt and accept the fact that this is my life now. And part of that is a lot of treatment and acceptance, and I've had to change my life plan. I plan to go to school, I plan to travel the world, but right now, what's best for me is having to treat myself like I'm physically sick, which is pull back the reins, trying to be nice to myself, be able to take a day that says I need to sit on the couch and watch something positive because I'm low, or I need to talk to my mom because I'm very, very elevated right now. It's like treating a flu, a very long battle with a flu.
And I'll say as well from my own perspective that the day that I realized that I was edging towards something that needed to be looked at medically and perhaps diagnosed if it came to that was in February of 2017. I hadn't even arrived at the office yet. I had actually gone to a breakfast meeting of a community group that I'm a part of. And some member of the group said a couple of things that were just said in jest, that were just said jokingly, but I took them seriously. And I came home and I collapsed in my wife's arms and sobbed for several minutes because everything that had just been building up to that time was set off by that one moment. And I knew I couldn't go back to work the rest of the day. And I called in, I took a sick day. I took a mental health day. I said, look, I'm sorry, I can't do this. And a few days later, I experienced very much the same thing. And that is when, in talking to my wife about this, that I realized that I may have hit a wall and may have hit the point of no return. So spoke to my general physician shortly after that. By the fall of that year, I had taken stress leave from my job. I had eventually left my job, and I started taking medication at that time, and I started getting regular counseling at that time. I got a referral through my GP to the mental health office in Port Hawkesbury and had a person who I really truly consider to be the best counselor I've ever had guiding me for the following 4 years. So it's the sort of situation where you do have to stop, put the brakes on, put your life on hold for as long as need be and say, I am not well, but I have the tools around me to help me to get through every day, to get through every moment. So I'm sure it sounds like all three of you have had days of reckoning like that as well too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember the day after I tried to commit suicide, they sent me to see a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist asked me, and I'm 17, and I mean, we didn't have the resources then that we have now, resources basically at our fingertips now, but he looked at me and he said, So what do you got to say for yourself? So I said, well, when am I going to be released? Because I have to go home and write exams. It was just before Christmas then. And can't remember what grade it was, grade 10, 11, whatever, 11 or 12. Anyway, and he said, well, it's a little late to be thinking about that, don't you think? So anyway, he asked me a bunch of questions, sent me home, and then from that time on, that wasn't the beginning of recovery for me, because then I harbored guilt, shame, all these things that you think, well, okay, well, I'm so weak, but you're not weak. And that's the big thing. You have to take steps. You have to be proactive for your own health. You have to be your own advocate. And these things are very important. Right now, there's so much available. All you have to do is Google CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and it'll get you in touch with, very, very affordable courses. I think Udemy offers, some people say, oh, well, they're not. Okay, when I started all my courses, my intention was not to teach it one day. It was to better myself, to bring healing to myself, to know the steps to take, coping skills. That's where I started. And this is where it takes time. It's a step process.
We'll want to talk a little bit more about your training as well, too.
Yeah.
But I want to put the same question to Taylor or to Tyler. Were there ever any moments like that where you realized, okay, this is not a myth, this is not, just me having a bad day, I have to take care of myself and I've got to try to get back on the right track, if there is indeed such a thing as a right track?
Tyler, would you like to take the question first?
Sure. Well, my, I guess, reckoning happened as a result of using cannabis and psychedelics medicinally. And the reckoning that I sort of had was, based around when I started to reflect back on myself and go inwards. And I remember asking myself if I had this paradigm shift because I've been traumatized by the Western medical model. I don't have the great story like you, where you had that great therapist for 4 years. I've seen a dozen therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. I've been on 7 or 8 different medications. It's never been helpful for me. And I was forced into a situation where I had to make my own shift. And that shift for me happened through researching psychedelics and this training that I did. And one specific shift that I made, and again, I think one of the difficult things that society has is our inability to hear different beliefs and just be okay with people having different beliefs. So when I first started getting into this stuff, I was like, oh, this is the truth, this is all this stuff. And I've since found more balance. And it's I know this is a particular belief system. It's been beneficial for me. And I'm not gonna talk about it in a way that this is the be all end all. But the shift that I made was the idea, in the Western medical model, the idea is that mental illness is a neurochemical imbalance. And I personally don't subscribe to that belief. I've been following a lot of research coming out of the UK by a scientist named Robin Carhart-Harris, who's studying an area of the brain called the default mode network. And this particular area of the brain, whenever we're stuck in rigid thought patterns, the default mode network is hyperactive. So this scientist, his hypothesis is that this is the actual physical seat of what our ego is. I've chalked up my anxiety, depression, OCD. I've sort of deduced them to rigid thought patterns, right? And they're kind of what perpetuates everything. So in the same way that kids need to learn to label their emotions, I've sort of found this process of learning to label when I'm stuck in a rigid thought pattern. And I'll do that by actually saying, okay, right now I have a hyperactive default mode network. And so on psychedelics, the research that they're doing under the influence of psychedelics this area of the brain, the default mode network, shuts off. And if there's a period of time under the influence of psychedelics where you're living without the influence of your ego. And that's, our ego, I've come to conceive it as, our ego develops as a protection for us, right? Like, so that's another like reckoning that I had is like, I used to think like of somebody like Donald Trump, I'd feel like, oh, that egotistical maniac. But, it's egotistical to call somebody egotistical. Yeah.
I never thought of it that way before. Yes, that's true.
So really, like now, like, I live my life like if I'm at the beach and I'm thinking about going in the ocean, right? I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, I want to go swimming. And it's like my ego, which protects me, it doesn't want me to feel uncomfortable, says, no, you don't want to go in there. It's cold. You don't want to go swim. And so I have a choice in that moment. I can, if I listen to my ego, then that perpetuates my avoidance behaviors, which perpetuates my anxiety, my depression, my OCD, all these things. So these last couple of years, it's been all about finding safe ways to challenge my ego, challenge my beliefs, challenge my limiting beliefs. So anytime something like that comes up, I'm like, you know what? No, I'm going to make myself go in the ocean. And I go in the ocean and I live life to the fullest and come out feeling great. Versus if I had not, wanted to stay comfortable, I would have not enjoyed swimming in the ocean.
I love how you said that because Michael Singer in The Untethered Soul calls the ego the roommate. Do you listen to the roommate when it's being critical, or do you just ignore it and go and enjoy life? I really like that.
And it's interesting, like I've come to view my own ego as my wounded inner child. When I first started doing this stuff where I was challenging my ego, I was more aggressive towards it. So, I'd be like, F you, ego, I'm going in the water. I don't care if you don't want me to. And then, like, throughout my studies with psychedelics and inner child healing and shadow work and all this stuff, I subscribe to this new belief that, oh, wait, maybe my ego is actually my wounded inner child. And if it is the case, how would I talk to a child? I wouldn't be like, F you, I'm going to do this. So I've become much more gentle with the way that I talk to myself, like through these like little things, like that. So I'll be like, it's okay, man. Like, so what if it's cold? We'll go in the water and we'll get used to it and we'll have a great time.
Well, the ego, it's interesting because the ego wants to protect the status quo. So like you said, it's a survival thing. It wants to protect you. Oh, don't do that, because it's always scanning your ego is always scanning your environment for any threats. So
I will keep this conversation in mind the next time I do the New Year's Day polar bear swim, likely at Marble Mountain or Point Michaud. Yes, exactly. But I will pick up, this is all very interesting, by the way. I do want you to be able to expand on it in just a couple of moments. I will pick up as well, though I will say that while I was fortunate to be able to get a great counselor over the last 4 years, that person is, by my count, the 8th or 9th counselor that I've had, both in person and through my previous workplace's employee assistance program over the phone, over a 13-year period. So I've been searching for quite a while, but you're right, you don't always find the right counselor or the right medical professional or the right direction for whatever mental health issue you have right away. And that's one of the most difficult things, is just the idea that sometimes you have to have the courage to keep searching, to keep looking, to keep examining. And I mean, I want to ask you, Taylor, about this as well, because I know yours has been a long journey that keeps taking different turns at every point. So can you tell me a little bit what that's been like for you, and coming to grips, and you mentioned the grieving process, coming to grips with each stage of the mental health issues that you deal with every day?
Yeah, I've had to go through quite a few different counselors, therapists, psychiatrists, and other professionals at the beginning of my journey of trying to find out who I was when it comes to mental illness and mental health. I was told by someone that I was just a girl who had a hormonal balance. First of all, I'm non-binary, so that's not even true to begin with. Secondly, I was told by a psychiatrist that I was just stressed and couldn't figure out how to deal with everyday life. I was told when I was dealing with what was actually suicidal ideations due to a depressive episode from bipolar disorder. I was told even when I was just in public and feeling suicidal, I could just hug myself and do this to deal with the suicidal ideation and the anxiety of being stared at people. That didn't work for me. It's discouraging, unfortunately. Only 2% of the population is estimated to have bipolar disorder, and there's still a lot of stigma even within the mental health field about it. So they're really hesitant to diagnose it for me.
But you were saying to me before we turned the cameras on, an interesting statistic, you did some research on this, that if you look at 2% of the Canadian population as having bipolar disorder, that's higher in terms of individual population numbers than the entire combined residency of Richmond, Inverness, Guysborough, Victoria, and Antigonish County.
Yeah, that's roughly 61,000, and roughly 76,000 people in Canada are believed to have bipolar disorder, if we follow the statistics perfectly.
Yeah, so that's a lot of
That's a
people
lot of
going
people.
through this right now. Speaking of those individual counties, one of the themes I did want to ask you all about in this conversation is what the reception was like within your friends and your family and your community when you finally felt that you had the courage to be open about your anxiety issues. And I mean, we have come, certainly no disrespect meant to anybody watching this right now and any of our friends, family, or neighbors, but I find that in the Strait area and in this culture in southern Cape Breton, we come from a background where mental health issues were often dismissed, were often made fun of, were tossed away as if we were just having a bad day or having a temper tantrum, and why don't we do what the pioneers did and just pull up our bootstraps and get back out there. So I just wonder if any of you have experienced attitudes like that, or how your friends, family, and community reacted when you finally had the courage to go public with what you were dealing with.
It's interesting because this is the first time I publicly have said that I used to suffer from depression.
Good for you.
Yeah, it's the first time.
Good for you.
But I do with all my clients with life coaching and NLP, but not publicly. No, it's the first time. So I really can't answer that. I'm not sure. I can get back to you on that to see how they've all.
Let's see how they react when they watch the show.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So
But congratulations. That's not an easy thing to do. It wasn't easy for me.
no, it's not easy, but it's necessary.
Yeah.
Because people think just because I'm a life coach and NLP practitioner, oh, well, then you shouldn't suffer. You shouldn't have any problems. I'm still experiencing challenges. Challenges are part of life. And we need coping skills to be able to deal with that.
Yeah.
I think that's very important.
Well, exactly. And I mean, part of the reason we do a program like this is because anxiety and depression and mental health issues carry many faces, and they could be found in professionals. You know, I talked about my time working at the Reporter at the newspaper and being able to write 12 to 15, 500, 600 word stories a week. But those stories didn't give the public a view to me crying at my desk when I was having a bad day. And those stories didn't see me lagging behind a tour of other reporters at Port Hawkesbury paper, following a technician there talking about brand new developments in paper making, trying to blink back tears and get my emotions under control because for whatever reason I was having a terrible anxiety day. So you do not see that in the public face of depression or anxiety disorder or any other mental health conditions. Tyler or Taylor, would either of you like to jump in on the reaction from your own friends, family, or community when you started going public?
Go ahead, Dan.
When I came out as autistic, people were slightly surprised because a lot of the time the face of autism is young boys who really like trains. I was a 23-year-old feminine presenting non-binary person who really liked Green Day. So that really kind of confused people, and I had learned to mask to hide my autism without knowing I had it, to try and fit in better. So that's part of the reason people were so confused. And this is actually my coming out as bipolar, is this Telile special, because I kind of, despite only having it for years and knowing for a few months that I'm bipolar, there's so much stigma that I had a lot of shame about it. So this is the first time I've really opened up about it.
Oh, so good. Right?
So my mom and sister are my biggest cheerleaders. They make sure I'm doing what has to be done. I'm making sure I'm taking care of myself.
Tyler, your own thoughts about how the general community or your friends and family responded?
Most of my life, I hid the fact that I experienced any anxiety at all. I remember anxiety as early as being in grade 4. That particular year, I had a particular teacher that year. I won't name drop or anything. But this teacher was a very harsh personality, and that really clashed with me. And a lot of time that year, I was sick a lot. I was always sick. And I remember specifically going to the doctor with my parents, and I remember the doctor saying that, it's all in my head. I remember my parents not reacting positively to that. Like also, stigma, like.
Probably because, and sometimes they just don't know how to help.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. And like now, like I've done so much digging into my family history. Mental health has always been a thing. It's a difficult thing to, as a parent who's experienced mental health and parents who experience mental health issues, serious mental health issues, there's a normal fear that my child will have mental illness. I have it with my own kids. Like I see a lot of behaviors that make me fearful, and that's part of the reason why that I've taken this time to work on myself and analyze my own behaviors, because I know that the only way to help my kids deal with those if they arise is if I figure out how to deal with it.
That resonates with me so much.
All throughout my childhood, I had what I now know to be anxiety, but like again, I was the good kid. I was always really smart. I always had good grades. I was on the outside, everything looked normal. But on the inside, like I did suffer a lot. In high school, grade 9, 10, I started having panic attacks. I never told anybody about it. So for 5, 6, 7 years, right into university, I was having like 3 to 5 major panic attacks in school, in university, all these places where I'm having these like, oh shit, like I'm dying,
Racing heart.
I'm dying, and I'm like, okay, I gotta hide this. I can't let anybody know that this is going on. I never talked to my parents. I never talked to friends. I never talked to anybody. I was never medicated. I never had counseling. It wasn't until when I was in university and I was studying psychology, I was learning about anxiety and panic disorders and all these things, I started developing, my own coping mechanisms, which, everything we do is coping mechanisms. All of our behavior is coping mechanisms. It gets to the point where you need to, if you can get to the point where you can reflect on your own behavior and realize what is actually a coping mechanism and say to yourself, is this helpful for me or is it harmful? And then also, is it helpful for others? Is it harmful to others? Then you can really start to dissect your behavior and change certain things. So yeah, when I started, it wasn't until like 2 or 3 years ago that I started openly speaking out on Facebook and like really going through inherited family trauma. Like I really kind of drug my parents through the mud a little bit, right? Because a typical thing is like, you go and you want to talk to your parents about like how, their behavior, affected you, and a typical response that a lot of people get, I think, and it's the response that I got, and I'm okay, like mom, dad, and I've had all these discussions, so I feel okay, like talking about it. But it's like, well, you think you had it rough as a kid, like when I was a kid.
Well, there's that pushback, that defense, they go into defense mode.
Exactly. So a lot of people end up stuck. I was stuck for a long time, holding a certain amount of resentment towards my parents. And, you know, I had got to myself where, as a behavior analyst, I was analyzing my behavior and analyzing my parents' behavior. Like, I really had to look past that. And like, when I started going in my family history, like, you know, I realized that I can't have the conversation that I need with my parents because they also have a conversation that they need to have that they were never able to have with their parents. So I spent a lot of time like listening. My mom was opened up quicker than my dad did. My dad took a lot longer to like open up and start talking about his childhood and how he was raised. But I sat and actively listened to my mom for a lot of her childhood trauma, which is some horrific stuff. And like her grandparents, you know, I learned about my great-grandmother who was, you know, labeled a witch and was always trying to kill herself. And my grandmother was, you know, 7, 8 years old, you know, taking all the kids out of the house because their mom was, you know, trying to kill herself again. And now that I'm like exploring like inherited family trauma and how like trauma like affects our DNA and our genes, and like when I picture it myself and think about my own suicidal thoughts and like the possibility that like, holy cow, like, is that even my thought, or is it like reminiscent of my great-grandmother's thoughts? And it just, they're strange perspectives that don't really fit in the current medical model. Like, there's a certain aspect, you know, thinking outside the box that you need to be open to have these things make sense. Yeah, so again, like when I started talking about all that stuff, you know, there was pushback. My parents were feeling defensive, but it was, I knew it was important. I needed to push through it. And over a year and a half or so, like, things changed. My parents softened up a little bit. We started to work through some things. And I just started having like these deeper conversations with everyone around me. And most people are really receptive to it. You know, you start talking this, and like, because when you start talking about these things that you've always hidden, it feels so good, right? And when you have another person who also opens up,
resonance,
like there's like, that's the deepest connection. Like when you connect through like traumatic experiences and realize like, holy cow, like we have such similar things going on here. Right?
That's why talking is so important.
Yeah,
absolutely.
A big reason why what we're doing here today and what all of you are doing here today.
And it's
is
so funny
important.
that you mentioned DNA, because I'm just into this epigenetics thing, and we can actually change the expression of our genes. It's very interesting. Like, you know, we inherit a belief system, a program, and we can change that.
Yeah.
We actually can. Take some work, but we can.
And I mean, I can speak for my own perspective and that of my wife, Kathy, as well, who's been one of the most supportive people and has struggled with depression and general anxiety disorder on her own, is that sometimes what needs to be reversed from a mental and emotional perspective has been deeply ingrained, not just for months or years, but for decades.
Into a program,
sometimes since childhood, sometimes since young adulthood, and you never forget moments like that. But the trick is being able to set yourself up or to work either within the current medical system or within the training or the information you've given yourself to make it work. And one of my heroes is a songwriter named Paul Williams, who's responsible for everything from the theme from The Love Boat to Kermit the Frog's Rainbow Connection. And he struggled for decades with drug and alcohol abuse. He finally got clean and sober in 1990, and he's written a book called Gratitude and Trust with a partner of his in this issue. And one of the most important and helpful things for me is he's written the words, "I can't do this, but something inside me can." And whether the something inside you doing something is making that first phone call to a doctor or to a crisis line, or doing some research to find out what could be happening to you, or just telling a friend or a spouse or a family member. Just something inside you is capable of doing that one step to help you deal day by day with the issues that you're struggling with right now.
Yes, and it's important to take that first step.
Yeah.
Be proactive in your...
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
And the first step is the hardest, because one of the
Of
things
course.
that anxiety disorder does is it lies to you.
Speaking of the ego.
Yeah. No, you can't do this. No, you're always going to be
Yep.
struggling. You can't get out of bed. You can't have a
So I
conversation
may as well just
with
accept
people.
it,
No,
yeah.
you might as well
Yeah,
just
yeah.
accept it.
Yeah.
You're done. No, you're not done.
No,
No,
it's just the
exactly.
beginning.
Yeah. Inside and outside the current medical field is mental health being taken seriously right now, October 2021. I mean, the dialogue has changed somewhat. We saw both with the previous provincial government and the new provincial government that there was actually and is a Minister of Mental Health. So that's being set aside as a separate government department. There seems to be more focus on this, but I mean, we're each talking about suicide prevention. We're only a few months removed from the terrible situation in New Brunswick where a young woman went to a hospital basically looking for any kind of mental help she could get and did not get it and wound up committing suicide hours later. So that touched off a firestorm of discussion in New Brunswick about the state of mental health there. So I guess the short version of the question I ask is it any better? Is mental health being taken seriously, even though we know there's more to be done? I'd like to start with you, Taylor, if I could.
I'm going to be bluntly honest, no. It's the reality that you're still waiting months. If you're a non-emergency case, you have to wait up to 6 months for any treatment. I was on a waiting list so long for counseling that when they called, I forgot I was on a waiting list. If you're an emergency case, it can still be up to 7 days for a hospital bed. If you're dealing with something other than anxiety and depression, people don't know how to treat you. They didn't know how to treat me, at least. And you have to drive. There's lack of access, physical access, like if you can't drive, or you have to go out of your area to get access mental health treatment. So many people that are non-white, non-cisgender, non-heterosexual, non-men are still being ignored in the conversation. Women are still being viewed as hysterical, or their symptoms are still being ignored. Sure, I'm lucky that I'm being treated, but God, how many years did it take for me to get treated properly? Not just medically treated properly, but treated as a human being in the system. There's so much more work that has to be done. With autism, there's still no social identity first model for disability. It's mostly just a medical model of disability. And we have a long way to go, especially in rural Nova Scotia. People are still falling through the cracks, and I'm scared how many lives it's costing.
Tyler, you've been able to see this to a degree within your own work. Are you following the same assessment as Taylor, that there's still a lot of work to be done here?
Absolutely, and I honestly, I think it's going to take things like this, to really change that, because
to light, yeah.
there's a lot of people, it's a funny line to walk, because you have to. There's so much division with everything, right? And there's division with mental health too, because the people who suffer from mental health, feel like, the people who aren't suffering are doing them wrong somehow, and the people who aren't suffering, view people as suffering, and think like why can't you just stop suffering? But it's everybody to a degree, in my opinion, is everyone has an ego, again, and everyone is egotistical, right? Again, like it's that shift from thinking like somebody like Donald Trump is egotistical. Everybody has an ego, and most of our behaviors are ego-driven, right? And there are people who, become busybodies, and people who, find success, through those roads of like tough love or like pull up your socks. I just got to keep going. But those people like have all the same issues as the person who can't get out of bed. The only difference is that they've, are better adapted to that kind of coping mechanism, that kind of coping skill. It's like, as long as I keep going, as long as I don't deal with anything, everything is good until you get triggered by something.
Yep.
And then you start lashing out. And the world right now is full of people lashing out at other people.
Yeah.
Right? And to me, that's indicative of everything that's underneath the surface that people are avoiding. And, and I think that the more and more that people start talking about our experiences, the more people do this, more and more people will stop and say, hey, okay, there's a lot of we're arguing about this stuff that doesn't really matter. Underneath that, deeper conversations, like people will find connection, people will find similarities, people,
It's like the iceberg, you only see a part of it,
Yeah.
and then the underneath is where all the action is. That's where the healing is. It's the deep stuff is what you don't get to see
Exactly.
on a regular basis.
I would love a world where you just go out and let's go to a party and everybody's talking about childhood trauma. You know what I mean? Like people would probably leave a place like that and just feel so good and feel so connected. Because that's really what everybody wants to talk about. Like all these, how did I become the person that I became? How did my parents become the people they became? How did my grandparents become the people they became? But, society sort of has us conditioned to pull up our socks and keep going. Let's not talk about this. It's busy, busy, busy. Time is money. We gotta work so that we can retire.
Jennie Pardy, your thoughts on the current state of mental health awareness and treatment in this area?
Oh, I think we still have a long way to go. Absolutely. And I think ultimately we have to say, okay, we accept it. The first step is acceptance. It is there. Whether you want to cover your eyes and say it's not there, it is there. And I think right now, the last number I got was like 264 million people around the world, globally, are suffering from some type of mental illness, whether it be general anxiety or depression, panic, stress, OCD, phobias. That number is rising every day. So I think we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, and it's with that acceptance part too. There's different facets to that. I mean, you can be aware of something, but awareness isn't enough.
Yes.
You can be aware of something, but then that thing that you're aware of is going to make you feel shame and guilt. And all these difficult emotions. And then once you feel those, then your ego kicks in. And if remember, our ego drives our coping skills. So if you've lived a life where your ego has, steered you to avoid things that make you feel uncomfortable, well, guess what? When you feel shame and guilt, you're going to do what you've always done, and you're going to want to avoid it. You're not going to want to process it. Right? And it takes, you have to dig deep to sit with your feelings and sit with the grief,
and that's uncomfortable.
It is incredibly uncomfortable. I throughout this last couple of years, I've got a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and for my 6-year-old, her entire early childhood, I was battling depression, and I know that I wasn't emotionally available for those the most important years.
And there's the blame game.
And so a lot of people, you can get stuck there. Let's say your ego really doesn't want you to process that. then you might tell yourself, like, you know what, it is what it is. I survived, my child will survive too. And like that, those thoughts, kind of perpetuate this cycle of trauma.
Yeah.
And like as individuals, like I think that we have a responsibility to analyze our behavior, learn how to sit with our feelings, learn how to critique our coping mechanisms and change them so that we become truer versions of ourselves, and we do better than the previous generation. And that's always happened. We look at if you dive into your family history, like you may think that like, oh my God, my parents, I so much didn't get but when you talk to them and you talk to them about their parents, they did the best they could with what they had.
Yes.
Right?
And it's not just our parents either. It's anybody that, it could be our teachers, our other students that we went to school with, like the bullying. There's a lot of things that factor into your situation. It's not just, it is, yes. It's your parents, your grandparents, your siblings, there's a lot that shapes that picture, that program.
If I can bounce off that, like what do you think that we can do individually or as a community or as a society to better mental health, understanding, acceptance, awareness?
I think
we're starting right now, but like what are some other steps that do you think that we can do?
Well, for me, once I learned the coping, yes, I had to go deep.
No, go ahead.
There's trauma there. There was and nobody's to blame because everybody, like you said, does the best that they can. That's why I say don't blame yourself for, things that you're seeing in your own children or whatever. That's not going to make anything better. It's what can I do to improve? What can I do to improve this? And there's a lot we can do. When I set out a group, a support group wasn't for me. I found it was depressing. Let's face it, being depressed is depressing, right? So a support group was not for me. So later on, when there's internet, there's like I said, resources at your fingertips. I started looking into better coping skills, for instance, because there's destructive coping skills as well. You cope by drinking, it numbs the feeling for a time, but that doesn't help. So for me, I started with CBT. My first 14-week program was cognitive behavioral therapy. There was light bulb moments in that 14 weeks, I can guarantee you, and I was just doing it for me, to better myself and for my family. So, and then it went on to other anxiety, the stress response, fight or flight. I learned about that. And then, of course, it was life coaching and neurolinguistic programming. I never did any of that to teach. But that's where I'm at now. Because it feels so good to know it's like you're standing in the dark and then you're standing in the light. That's what recovery from a mental illness is like. It is.
Yeah, and it's interesting, especially with anxiety and depression. What you resist persists.
Resistance is persistence.
So like the big thing for me, anyway, like from my perspective, when I realized that, when I was dealing with days with anxiety or depression, the thought of not wanting to be depressed, the thought of not wanting to be
accepting
anxious, made it last longer, made it worse, right? So if you lean into it, if you're having a day where you're feeling anxious, lean into it. Let yourself fall apart.
Yes.
Allow it. So here's the thing, though, with that, what you need to be conscious of is the people around you. Because the people around you may not have the emotional availability to support you falling apart. And, maybe they can for a day, maybe they can for 2 days. But ultimately, from my, in my experience, the people around me have always hit a wall with their own emotional availability. And then when that wall gets hit, then it's the pressure that comes back on. Then like that triggers my own internal, okay, like I can't be anxious anymore. I can't be anxious. So
Suppress.
and then you start to suppress that, right? Then you start to suppress all those feelings. And when we suppress feelings, I mean, that gets stored.
Boom,
in
it's
our
going to come
body.
out somewhere.
And if you go years and years and years suppressing,
Yeah.
suppressing tears, suppressing whatever it is, it starts to manifest in physical ways. I had a really interesting progression of my mental illness. Anxiety, panic attacks, depression, treatment-resistant depression, OCD, intrusive thoughts, suicidal thoughts. It's a progression that's not linear. Like it kept getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
In my family, there's dementia, Alzheimer's. And I'm convinced that's the track that I would have continued to follow had I not started to go inward and unpack, all of my own behaviors and stop, stop externally thinking I'm not going to get better until the people around me learn how to support me. It's I've got to understand that everybody has their own stuff, even though they're not suffering the same way. The strong person who never falls apart is still not emotionally available. And it's the same as the person who's falling apart in bed. You know what I mean?
There's a lot of people, and once you open up, then a lot of people come forward and say, oh yeah. Always keep looking. Always make that step forward.
Especially with suicide too. If you have suicide thoughts,
Yes.
tell somebody about it, talk about it. Because so many people have those thoughts, and there's interesting things that happen when they happen. Because you don't want to, when I started having suicidal thoughts, I was a stay-at-home dad. I told myself, my God, what if people know I'm having these thoughts? Are my kids safe with me? Am I safe to be and things spiral really quick, and they're just thoughts, they make us feel things, but they're not necessarily a reflection of who we are, and
They're just thoughts.
yeah. As soon as you start talking about it,
Yep.
it loses their power. They start maybe not right away, but the more and more you talk about it, things start to lose their power. And that's always been a benchmark for me, is my ability to talk about these things that have been so triggering. I'm a lot less emotional talking about it. And to me, that's indicative of healing. When you can start talking about these things that are underneath the surface. If you're getting emotional, that's a good thing. Keep talking, let yourself be emotional, and keep talking about it until you get to the point where you're not so emotional and you have this sense of comfort talking about it. And if you can get to that place, then you'll find less suffering, I think.
And I say this not as a psychologist or any such thing, but if you are feeling an emotion, that means you are still alive, you are still with us, and something is still stirring in your heart that can, in the short or long term, wind up being good for you and for the people around you. So don't run away from feeling an emotion by any stretch. Taylor, the last word goes to you.
You're not alone, first and foremost. There's people who love you, people who support you, no matter what your mental illness is telling you. On a more practical side, because the political advocate part of me will never leave, if mental health is something that you're passionate about, or if you're someone who deals with mental illness, or you're somebody who has been touched by this special, please consider writing to your MLAs, your MPs, to urge the importance of mental health treatment within rural Nova Scotia, because it's so often forgot about. Emergency rooms are closing, people are falling through the cracks, and you never know, this is not to scare anyone, but you never know when an event may happen that you experience mental health yourself and need those supports in place, or someone that you love needs those supports in place, because guaranteed someone in your life right now, if not you, is dealing with mental illness, and we all have mental health.
I'm very grateful to all of you for joining me today here at Telile. Thank you so much, Tyler Shea, Taylor Linloff, and Jennie Pardy. And thank you to Becky Bourinot and Nick Boudreau in the control room for guiding us through this morning as well. Once again, we stress none of the four of us are physicians, none of the four of us are psychologists. If you feel that anything that you've heard in the past hour resonates with you or a member of your family or a friend or someone you know, please don't waste a second to reach out to a doctor or to a crisis line. Please tell somebody, and please know that all four of us and many more are with you right now. Thank you for joining us for this Mental Health Life Experiences panel here on Telile Community Television. I'm Adam Cooke.